Writing for publications like HuffPost, Delano is from Great Barrington, Massachusetts, the same city as early 20th century Black American sociologist, historian, and Pan-Africanist civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois. He's also the co-founder, that's Delano, of the Blackyard Collective NYC, quote, a support network for Black queer people recovering from the disease of addiction and alcoholism. I look forward to learning more about Mr. Burrowes and what motivates him to embrace who he is while encouraging others to do the same. Hey, Delano, welcome. How are you?
Hey, I'm good.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me tell my stories, tell our stories.
Yes,
So
yes,
much,
yes.
so much of my journey has been about realizing like my story isn't specific to me and being able to like share honestly and people saying like, oh my God, that's my story too.
Yeah.
Letting go of this idea that I'm so individual and the things that I go to are like specific just to me.
Exactly, exactly. I agree. It's all about I think the gift of social media is that we can do this now. We can be in different parts of the world, different parts of the US, and still come together. And as you mentioned, find out what makes us, still ourselves, but also what binds us together.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And form like these communities, as someone who never felt like I belonged to any community, realizing, oh, right. As soon as I start to accept myself, then like full heartedly and bring my full like authentic self. I know that's an overused word,
hmm
but then and, like connecting with the real me as opposed to this version of myself that I want people to like think, is me, which is my
Yeah.
life for so long.
You said overused, but I think we don't use it enough, maybe.
Well, I think there's a lot of pressure sometimes with that authentic voice. Do you know the word authentic voice? And I think as Black people or people have marginalized or different identities, sometimes it can be like, hey, what is my authentic voice when I have different voices in different situations? Do you know? I think sometimes I like to think of it as just my this true voice in this moment or my necessary voice because sometimes there's a limit to the vulnerability I can show sometimes in certain spaces as a Black man, you
Right,
know.
right. Well, I definitely like in the last couple years that I've been learning from like stories like yours is that it's important or it's okay for me to pause, as you said, and say, I may not feel safe right now, not physically, because I think a lot of times, which is important, we focus on the physical, but just as important is the emotional and the psychological safety.
Right. Especially with what's going on right now. I mean, always, but there's videos out there and sometimes it can be with me this idea like, well, if I don't watch it and prioritize mental health, am I part of the problem because I'm burying my head in the sand and I need to see these brutal images? It's like, no, but I'm not serving anybody if I'm emotionally distraught.
I completely agree. And what helped me with saying that it's okay if I don't feel comfortable in watching these acts of violence, these recorded acts of violence, is another Black person who talked about it on social media because I
Mm.
was going through that same struggle of, should I be doing it? Am I, for the
Hmm.
cause? And just in hearing you reiterate that now, I don't think any different because it's trauma.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's any different than not comparing, but in the same ballpark, comparing a woman being sexually assaulted. Why would I sit and watch that?
Right. Right. And there's, it can be the martyr syndrome too. Well, it's okay. I'm doing it for the cause. But also, as we have these histories of legacies of trauma, generations of intense trauma, I noted, I listened to one of your podcasts and you were talking about the book by Isabel Wilkerson, The Warmth of Other Suns, which I love so much. There's something about knowing this stuff, in this sort of abstract way, like reading a history book, but then how she focuses in on like a few stories and really seeing all the emotions attached to what's it like being like, hey, I went to school to be a doctor and still I can't get a room in a motel. My ancestors grew up in Alabama, dirt poor, and moved to my mom and, stepdad and people, a whole flock of them from this small town in Alabama, moved to the Berkshires in Massachusetts for better lives for themselves and for their kids.
That is a history, as she mentioned a few times in that book, that has not really been fully acknowledged and explored. And using the term migration, that the fact that within our own country, as American citizens, we had to migrate similar to people who left, during times of impoverishment in Europe and other parts of the world. We had to do that in our own country to find a better life.
I recently did a oral history project where I interviewed Black elders in Massachusetts. And one of the people I interviewed was my mom and my aunt, who both grew up in Alabama. And really understanding what it was like for them to move there. But also the story of like my uncle first moved to the Berkshires to work in a elite boarding school in the kitchen. He saved up enough money. He sponsored another person who lived with him until they got money. And it's very similar to like the research I've done on immigration and migration from people from Mexico and all these, where the sponsorship, and it put it all in this larger context to me. And I was like, oh, right. The stories were so rich and it connected me so much deeper to my mom, and to hear her be able to tell these stories, these small stories of, hey, I was going to the beach with my 4-H club and, as a kid, and we accidentally got onto the white side of the beach and said, so realizing what it was like for my mom as like a 8-year-old and all these like adults, white people and kids yelling the N-word at them.
And hearing that in the context of children, because I think, similar to, they call it Black trauma porn when we watch these videos, I think, or I perceive sometimes there's a disconnect that this has happened to actual people, and more in particular to children. And your story of your mom, what she experienced, that's similar to something I heard a guest, Stefano Duke in Italy, from Florence, Italy, share when he and his sister were 5 years old in the bus in Italy and having a similar situation in a different language, but being called the N-word, and how traumatic that was for him and his sister.
And how those traumas, even I know for myself that I didn't realize I was going through trauma, especially, most of us don't. This is a newer language we're starting to speak and acknowledge.
Yeah, that way we're surviving, or were surviving for a long time. But now, as you said, our language is changing for the better for us. Yeah. Yeah. Well, before we get going a little too far in this particular topic, I just had a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Your social media handle on Instagram is Theodore Huxtable. So I know the name, but what's behind choosing that handle?
Theodore Huxtable, who is, from the Cosby Show, that was this example of like Black success and crossover. And he was like the perfect, Black kid. I wanted to be acceptable to everybody. I wanted to be like one of the good Black ones. And so for me, Theodore Huxtable was that. I was so unhappy as a kid that I made up a fantasy version of myself. My biological dad wasn't in my life. So all of a sudden, I have a biological dad that lives in New York, in Brooklyn. And he's got money, and he has a brownstone, and is really the Cosby Show, And what it did is it prevented me, this pathological lying that I started, prevented me from ever being close to anybody, because I was like scared they were going to find out the real me, because I was just putting out a version of myself.
Yeah, but I like that you're owning it now, which is owning your history. One of the things I've learned in the last few years with rediscovering writing and even doing this platform, I didn't have the language for it. I wasn't aware that I was hiding, but that's what I was doing, because I didn't want to fully accept that I was a Black person from Phoenix, Arizona, or even the way I sounded to some people, and the language, not always, but sometimes that was negative around that. And now saying, that's who I am. And if it hasn't changed in this amount of time, maybe I need to stop and say, hello, Eric. How are you?
Right. And simply as simple as that, like, hello, hey, hello, Delano, hello, Eric. Because I don't fit into these categories of Blackness because of how I speak or dress or my interests. Therefore, I'm not Black. And then I'm gay on top of that. And so I'm all these like different communities, but I'm gay, but I'm Black, but I'm Black, but I'm gay. All of that stuff made me who I am. And I have such pride in every part of that. Everything I've gone through, I have pride in. My resilience, the resilience of Black people. And it's important for us to reframe these traumas and realizing, but I'm here, and I'm acknowledging. And some of it is just, I'm talking about it. It's not about there's a solution. It's just like the solution is really just to talk about it. And it's not about this idea I'm going to like overcome it, but maybe I can make friends with it. Maybe I can sit with it.
I like that. Make friends with it. Yeah. You're also an artist. Would that include your paintings behind you, your works?
So this is my wall of inspiration. And so the idea is like I'm right across from my bed. And so when I wake up and go to bed, these are all the things that remind me of how far I've come. You know, the people, there's James Baldwin. There's a photo of my friend Wiafe took at a sober event. And I just love the black male coming from the water. There's a mask that I took, I found when I was in Amsterdam. And I overdosed on drugs when I was in Amsterdam. And then I found this mask and I was like, somehow I found peace and connecting to that. There's a little drawing I found in a Paris. And right up on top is a photo of myself.
I saw that on your
And
social media. Yeah.
yeah, and what that reminds me is that I can't change the fact that I had traumas and pains and all kinds of stuff and not the best childhood. But what I can do is I can make amends to that childhood now, and I cannot continue that legacy and do things that I know and push up against fears. The fears that I'm unlovable, I'm never going to be successful, all this kind of stuff, and say, you know what? No, I'm not going to believe that story because I'm going to make amends to that childhood self, and I'm rooting. I'm reaching back in time and I'm hugging you and say, holding hands with that childhood self and like, hey, we're doing this. We're doing
I
this
like that.
together.
Yeah. But that's the books we read. That's the movies we watch. So yeah. And so yours is added to that.
Right. But to your question, like my art is performance art. So I do a lot of stuff connected to W.B. Du Bois. I do a lot of stuff around race and the way that people are seen. You know, W.B. Du Bois talked a lot about internalizing the idea that your very being is a problem, and that double consciousness where Black people are always kind of split in two. There's the thoughts you're having inside, and then there's that other awareness of how you're being perceived and seen. So I've done things like I did a performance at Museum of Modern Art where I walked around with this giant Trayvon Martin mask because the museum had just done these efforts like put more Black art on the wall. And I was saying, but also you have to think about the ways in which people are welcomed in and how people are seen. And even if you have money, how you may not want to be in that museum. And so I walked around and a friend was videotaping with this big mask that had the Trayvon Martin with the gold tooth because during the defense of George Zimmerman, they used that photo of him to say, "Oh, look at him, he has a gold tooth. You know, hey, he's not a good one. He's like a thug." And so I walked around with that mask, and it was liberating to do that. And so I've done other performance art. So a lot of it is about the nuances of like racism. You know, not the videos, but also the ways in which people don't want to address their own stuff.
Mm.
You know, and so last year I did this thing called the Great Barrington Project, where it was connected to there's a performance artist called Marina Abramovic. I always pronounce her. I'm sure I'm pronouncing her name wrong, but she did this thing at the Museum of Art like 12 years ago, where people could sit across from her and just stare and make eye contact for as long as they wanted, and she did this for three months every day around the clock. And I saw it, and I was like blown away with the beauty of just people were crying, emotional, just everybody wants to be seen and seen, and to have these like beautiful moments. But I was also thought like, what would it be if it was a Black person? We talk about the way we speak. I know when I open my mouth, people are kind of like, oh, I didn't expect you to speak like that. You know, I can just see it in their eyes where they're kind of like, oh. But so there's all these preformed notions and we all have them, but to acknowledge how Blackness has these certain connotations that the media, the world has, you know, imparted upon us. And so I did this project in Great Barrington where for a week I sat in public and people were invited to come and make eye contact. And I called it, How Do You See a Black Person?
Mm.
It's next going to be in Pennsylvania, in Reading, Pennsylvania in June during their Juneteenth performance. And then I'm talking to some other places about doing it. And then at the end of the event, there is a town hall in which people in that community, this one being Great Barrington, talk about their experiences being Black in the community. And they could submit it through like the website or like text me or whatever. And then I had an actor read out those stories and also people who came on stage and spoke about talked about their experiences. And it was a lot more than I thought it was going to be emotionally.
How was it for you?
I had to realize that I was trying to like do this project that was going to like show everybody, like, you know, teach everybody this. But a lot of it was me teaching myself and realizing I'm human and I still deal with some of those struggle sometimes in not speaking what I'm really feeling. Because a lot of people actually sat down for this sit and then they turned it on themselves and started talking about their experiences with race, white people. And they flipped it and it was like, but the project is about how you see black people. But there was this, what we call sometimes the white fragility, the white tears. And so I got a lot of that. And so part of me wanted to, well, I don't want to go and comfort them because, but also like I'm human and I want to comfort them. And so I was struggling with those moments. And a lot of people drove by in cars saying like, beeping the horn and saying like, I see you just like I see any black person. I see you like a friend. Or I see like I see any person. I see you like a friend.
These are non-Black people.
Right. And I wanted to be like, but you don't.
My own personal experience with non-Black people is I don't want to teach because, you know, me teaching you how to be a better person, I don't know how to do that because I don't know your story.
Right.
However, it seems like it still is more powerful when you can just maybe, sounds cheesy to say it, reach one person.
Yeah. And right. I didn't realize until afterwards what I was going into. I didn't know that I was going into this mentality of trying to teach people, you know? And I'll say one of the most profound moments was the longest sit was a white man who came in and I kind of judged him and I realized, oh, I did the same thing that I'm calling people out. I looked at his dress. Oh, he looks upper middle class. Why is he coming to sit? You know? And he sat and it was the longest sit for like 40 minutes.
Wow, just the two of you staring at each other.
And I realized how much anger I was holding on to. But then something shifted and we both just, I saw him, his humanity. You know, I started to like, I practiced like mindfulness and I go to all these Buddhist retreats and I started practicing this chant that we do, like, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be safe. And I saw him wishing that for me. And we both became teary and emotional. And it became this like real connection, this conversation just through like sight. And at the end of it, he got up and left.
What do you mean he didn't converse with you or?
Most people talk before or after. He was the only one that sat down, didn't have to say a word, and then he got up and left. So I don't have any story behind it. And I kind of like that. I found a lot of healing over that project. And I'm looking forward to doing it again in Pennsylvania in June and then other places. And even I may go to Europe. I was just amazed at the response of people and amazed at the conversations we had at the community town hall.
Okay. You're talking about W.E.B. Du Bois's double consciousness, and for me, how I kind of describe for myself, but you know, amongst us, because we still need to talk about how we see ourselves as Black people, I believe, but I describe it as being like a secret agent. It's like I walk into my neighborhood Starbucks. Okay, that table just looked at me. They're still staring at me. All right, I just caught the eye of the person behind the counter. So I kind of got a general idea, I believe, of how that energy is going to be when I get to the counter. It's like all these things that we're, I think, hyper aware of in our everyday interactions.
Oh, I love that. I love that idea of the detective. You're right. You're looking for these clues because in it's survival. It's not even about being paranoia. It's like you actually just have to do that. It's a survival thing. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah. So you've talked a lot about Massachusetts. Is that where you're based?
I live in Brooklyn, but I actually just took a job as a racial justice coordinator with this amazing nonprofit called Multicultural Bridge that's connected there. So I'm mostly remote, but I spend 1 week a month in person. I'm excited about like, you know, the changes that are happening in that area. There's now a W.B. Du Bois Middle School because W.B. Du Bois grew up there, but only until 2020 did it really pick up momentum, and that's when they named the school
2020.
post George Floyd. I'm actually going to give a talk at the middle school soon and talk about my project, but also to see like at that school they have a queer alliance. You know, it's a school 200 students in rural Massachusetts, and to be able to see like the youth and what's going on and their commitment to having these conversations about identity and how it affects is just it's really inspiring, you know. And in communities like the Berkshires where people there's that nuance of race where people like to, well, I voted for this person and I'm super liberal and I, you know, do this and that, but like so I don't want to talk about my own like where I might little race, you know, issues going on.
I wrote it down actually where you talked about liberalism, and how that can be in some ways worse because a person or a group says, oh, well, I don't believe it. in racism, or I don't discriminate in my everyday life. But, as we know, as Black people, is so much more nuanced than that. And
Right.
I believe most non-Black people know that too, because you don't want to think about it.
Mm-hmm. And they know it, but it's knowing and acknowledging and admitting can be, different things. I think of like the Christian Cooper, that situation in Central Park. He was the bird watcher, and then the woman called because do you remember that when that
Yeah, I
happened? A
do.
couple of
Yeah.
because if there's no video of that, it's not really translatable. Wait, you said she looked at you a certain way, or she said African American a certain way. Are you over exaggerating?
Are you
You
a little
know?
hypersensitive?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're a little hypersensitive. But then we saw that video and we realized, oh, wow, right. But also there was like the class issue and all that kind of stuff because it's also, well, he was like Harvard educated and he speaks this way. Like, how crazy is it that she would think he's like, wants to, but what if he hadn't gone to Harvard?
And speaking of education, what's your educational background?
So I quit school in 11th grade. A lot of it was trauma from growing up there. I was really struggling with the social dynamics of being in school. And the teachers would always say, he's great, but the interaction, he just couldn't deal. And it was really not me able to deal with like my true self. And then I started, after that, after I left, I went to community college and studied painting. And then I studied photography in New Mexico. And then when I went into recovery, I'd always had dreams of being a writer and I wanted to write, but I was like, my time has passed. It's too late. And then I got this like amazing group of Black queer people in recovery, who formed Icantina, which later turned into Blackyard Collective. They were like, especially my friend Michael was like, you know what, you've got a lot to say. You need to go back to school. And I was like, girl, that ship has sailed. Um, and they really encouraged me. And I found this program with Bard College, which specifically were people that have left school for different reasons. And I applied and I got in. And it was the best thing I've ever done. And I discovered performance art. And I just studied all these like reading people, like these poets like June Jordan and, Bell Hooks and Claudia Rankin and James Baldwin I always loved, and realizing like, oh, wow, I can write my true story and it doesn't have to fit into an idea of what writing can be or poetry could be. I can still be myself. The ways that shame manifests, I didn't start telling people that until like this past year, like the last year. I had so much shame about it and realizing the ways that I still can be like, well, I can't tell that. What are they going to think? Because people like hear me speak and they make these assumptions, and I'm trying to fit into the Theodore Huxtable model, and being like, well, that's not me. I'm Delano Burrowes.
I have to use that for myself because I can relate to that. I dropped out of college, moved to LA to be an actor and didn't share about that for years. And to your point of persona, I'm aware enough, not necessarily in my everyday, being conscious of that, but I'm aware enough to know of how I can be perceived. And I didn't tell that for years, but I did go back to school. I went to a community college in LA County. But even to that point, me saying community college in LA County doesn't sound prestigious enough. It's like, well, who's judging who? I'm
Mm.
judging myself.
Hmm. Would you like actively lie about it, or is just kind of like lie by omission? Like, well, let's change the subject because I would
It
do that.
was
Like,
lie
oh,
through omission.
education. Hmm.
Yeah, and being more of a quiet person, it was probably a survival technique in childhood, but I'm more conscious of it now, but aware definitely at a certain point in my life that, oh, well, if I don't say anything, we'll just let them assume whatever.
Right, right.
You mentioned the Blackyard Collective NYC, which is recovery based organization. Can you
Hmm.
share more about that?
Yeah. So when I came into recovery, the spaces were really white. And the thing about recovery is they say come in and be vulnerable and share all your stuff. And it's like, but also I'm going into rooms of mostly like white gay men who've sexualized and categorized me and in different ways. And I'm culpable in many ways to like play into that. And it's like, well, there's a limit to how much vulnerability I'm going to give, or how much power I'm going to give. So about 6 years ago, a few of us were like, hey, there aren't that many Black people. And we all know each other, but we don't really know each other. So let's get together for a brunch. And we started doing that. And there were like 7 of us. And we started to open up and talk about stuff we realized so much shame about, and things we never felt comfortable, like internalized racism and colorism and educational issues and all kinds of stuff. And then they became bigger and they became monthly, and different people would host them. And people were like, oh my God, this is changing like my recovery. And then during the pandemic, we turned it into a virtual meeting. And now we have people from all over the world that show up. And we've done retreats.
Okay.
We've done retreats. We've done 2 in Provincetown. And seeing like 30 Black queer people going down, mostly white Provincetown, it was crazy. Like people were stopping literally in their tracks, being like, these people are laughing and enjoying themselves in this like way we like a group of Black people just outside the context of whiteness. And it was liberating for us. And we've done like Juneteenth events, and we've done like the theater. A couple of weeks ago, we did Strange Loop for the second time, a Black queer play here in New York that won the Pulitzer Prize and the Tony. And so we decided, let's turn this into a nonprofit. Let's make this even bigger. And so we're officially a nonprofit, and we're in the like raising money stage right now, the Blackyard Collective NYC.com, .org. The ultimate goal is in like 3 years to have a Black queer sober conference. And right now their immediate goal is to do like mutual aid, have more of these events and make them more accessible to people of all different like financial means, and, theater stuff. So it's not just like, hey, let's get together and talk about our traumas. Let's get together and celebrate. Let's get to go to the museum. Let's get together and laugh and go to the park. And that's part of recovery, that healing and that community. One of the people that went to Strange Loop, she had never been to the theater before to be a play. And then this play has like, she's a trans woman, and this play has trans characters in it. And she's like, oh my God, to go to the play and to see someone that looks and is like me on stage, it's given me so much and it meant so much. And to me, that's what like Blackyard Collective is about.
Yeah. I'll definitely have to ask you more about that after this call. Definitely, great to hear that it's global. Yeah, because, of course, the recovery community, but also just in general within the LGBTQ plus community, even this platform, when I first started to discuss the idea, and some people intrigued, like, well, why would you need to do that? Even in the Black community, well, I thought you guys were fine, because that's one of the things that I've been educated on these last almost 2 years is, Black people who I believe are allies, but they assume like, oh, well, we see these shows, we see these programs. I was like, but do you really see us?
Right. And yeah, wow. Yeah. Do you see us?
Yeah, and then just the beauty of the story with the woman that you just mentioned, who that sense of pride of seeing somebody that looks similar to you in media, because I always say media educates.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely me being here, definitely me being here in Europe as an American, we don't realize how very Eurocentric we are.
Mm.
Music, I think we have a little bit of a influence in as far as Black Americans in particular, but even still, we don't have the power because, as traveling outside of the US, Black American music is global, which means it's making a lot of money, which also we know means most of the people that are making that music are not making that money. So, but back to media representation, just to hear what you're doing with the Blackyard Collective NYC, it just really warms my heart. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. It warms my heart too. Like to see people together in community who never felt like they belonged is mind blowing, and to see people connecting in such this profound way with themselves and with each other and something bigger themselves, realizing the power of community. We're so much together, like also walking down that street in Provincetown together. It's magical. There's like light and energy and wow.
Yeah, and to challenge the community at large, the LGBT community at large, because the vision I get with you guys in Provincetown is, I may be perceiving, but that initial sometimes energy I've kind of sent sometimes of, why are you here? It's like, well, you
Right.
said we belong here, so why wouldn't I be here?
Right. We're really confused that we had so much attention. Like people, I'm not kidding. It was like being a celebrity when we're that group. People would like you look back and like they're like a half mile down and still just like staring or taking photos. And we talked to our guest house, the owner of the guest house, and it's the only guest house in P Town, John Randall House, that's owned by a black person. And he said, do you know what it is? They're used to like black people in the context of other white people, like in this place sometimes, and like enjoying, but it throws them for a loop to see a bunch of black people laughing and enjoying themselves without the context of whiteness around.
Yeah, I went through that last summer. I'm part of a group here, Black men, gay and straight, and we had a get together last July in a trendy restaurant in Soho in London, and we really were immersed in this amazing conversation. And then every now and again, I would you kind of look around just casually, and then to your point, it's like, oh, we're on display here.
What's going on? What's their story?
Yeah.
Hello.
What are they plotting?
hmm How long have you lived in Europe?
I'm a digital nomad right now,
hmm
mostly for the last 3 years, but my goal is to live in Stockholm. That's the first choice. But I've been here in Brighton consistently since last November. And I have to
Okay.
admit, I really like it here. And I came here through Pierre Monnerville, who's a French photographer
hmm
who I interviewed for episode 5 of our Black Gay Diaspora podcast. So, yeah, yeah. So, to answer that question. But I want to get to your writing, and you wrote a piece in November 2021 for HuffPost titled "My White Teacher Used a POC pen name to sell her book. Should I have outed her?" Very, very candid and emotional piece for me reading it. How was it for you writing it?
I talked about my struggle with speaking up about race, and so I was like, well, am I part of the problem? Should I be more like angry at this woman? But I was compassionate and I saw her as a person. That is my truth. That's who I really am. But I was worried because the editor told me, stories like this about race and stuff, they're going to like be prepared. You're going to get like a lot of pushback, and it was one of their most commented stories of the year. And actually, if you go on now, I think it's 450 comments, but there were more than 500 because they had to take some away because they were so negative. And it was hard. I can stop. My friend told me don't continue reading. They were really brutal. Like it was, and I got it also from some black people too. Not many, but saying like you weren't angry enough or you gave her too much, and people saying, and I was like, I'm getting it from every direction. But this is also who I spoke. I knew it was from a place of truth. And I knew if I wrote it and trying to be someone else, and people are like, "Oh, right," that wouldn't have felt authentic. To use that word, authentic again. I wrote it was an authentic article, and whether people push back, and I realized how much stronger I am. Like, oh right, everybody's not going to accept me. If I speak from a place of truth and authenticity, there is no way everybody's going to agree. Especially the more my voice becomes vocal. And for someone who, as a kid, was like almost mute, I was so shy. Social anxiety. That's why I left high school. The social anxiety. I couldn't speak, and now to be able to like come into my own and speak from a place of truth and be like, all right, I can weather this. You know, I got pushed back about the art project, the Great Barrington project. Some of it valid, and I'm growing, and learning, and being like, oh, okay, I can take criticism. I was like, I'm writing this little article, and I don't even know if they're going to publish it. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, it became this big thing, and I got people like literary agents like, hey, when you're ready, you can write a book. I mean, we're interested in you writing a book, like big literary agencies. But also post that is I went into like this pretender mode, like, or this fear of like, oh my God, everyone's gonna figure me out. That's all I had in me. They're gonna reject me. And so let me stay in my safe place and not push, but talking to other people, and I can in the Blackyard Collective, etc. I'm keeping going forward, and the art project has got a lot of attention that I didn't expect. Um, yeah, it's going into that more of being a more public person. There's a lot of it brings up a lot.
Yeah, standing up to yourself, or at least that's what
Yeah,
I'm learning.
yeah,
It's for me, the piece was so relatable because that was an extreme in some ways, but I can relate, working in corporate America for years and, being in these situations and these moments where I think every Black person, if we, look behind our own curtain, can relate to something like that, where you're the only Black person. because the way you described, I really, to your point, to your gift as a writer, I was there when you talked about how you just look straight ahead in
Mm,
those moments, and you
mm.
know, I've been there where you're just having this dialogue, like, no, I can't be crazy. I cannot
Right,
be crazy.
right. And sometimes I can adopt this idea that I have to represent all blackness to people. I'm the only black, and if I get angry, they're gonna judge all black people. Just like almost every black person I know, at least in the states, when there's like this really egregious crime or something, the first thought is, please don't let
Please
him be
don't let it
black.
be black.
Please don't let him be black. God, don't let him be black. And it's like, why do I care? But I do.
Yeah, yeah, and why, you know, I try to push back or find ways to push back of not being the representation of millions of black people across the planet. Like, you
Right,
know, here in Europe, sometimes people who I could tell are well intentioned,
right.
but they'll say, "Oh, well," like I remember someone asking me, "Well, how do you do locks?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm not a hairstylist, and I never had that book, so you know, maybe Google it."
Google is our friend, people. Google is our
Okay.
friend.
So yeah, but no, I thought it was a very well written piece, and the fact that it was received both positively and negatively for me shows that it was necessary to write it.
And I will say, outside of like the comments, a lot of people message me through social media and such that were super positive, like crazy. And that was this concentrated period because a month after that, I did the Humans of New York. Do you know what this is an international blog that has like 15 million followers, and I came out publicly as a crystal meth addict. And so that I had like thousands and thousands of comments of support. And that when I was like, oh my God, I'm putting that out there. That was really hard. And so I had coming from like, I'm not going to show anything to anybody. And within 1 month period, I was talking about my race stuff. And then I was talking about the addiction stuff. And it was like, oh my God, it felt liberating to be like, wow, my real self is out there. No more secrets. Fewer secrets. Fewer secrets.
You know, you're also a poet, and I found your piece that was "When I'm Not Black," another great piece, and I really like how you, with each paragraph, and one of them, well, the first one, which starts off with "When I'm not black, I'm waking up," and you know that was published in June 2020. Was this inspired because we know what was going on around that time? Was this inspired by the events of or the explosion that happened after the public recording of George Floyd's murder?
No, that was actually a coincidence that was published at the time, but I had it was accepted on March 10th, 2020, which happened to be my sober date. So it was a beautiful present for myself. And they many months before that they said that it was going to be published at the time. And then all those events happened, and I spent the pandemic. I was living in Brooklyn, but my stepdad had died. My mom was by herself, and I went back to Massachusetts and wound up being there for 5 months. So Black Lives Matter stuff was happening, and people celebrating, marching all over the world. And I'm in this all white town dealing with race stuff. And then those poems came out, and once again, I was just blown away with the response. It was their, I think, fifth or so it was in their top 10 like most read poems of that entire year. And once the response, the messages of people saying like, "Oh, that's my story," and realizing the power of telling our stories, the uncomfortable stories, and connecting once again, connecting to myself and connecting to others, was crazy. And it felt, and being able to write, I never even imagined I could be a poet, and realizing there's such a metaphor for that, realizing that I can see the beauty in my experiences. I can write about them in a way that's poetic. I can create like language and rhythm to stuff that wasn't so. And that's my journey really about, hey, I went through some bad stuff. I went through some trauma. We all have. I can transform it through art, through my writing, through poetry, the way that I walk through the world, the way that I connect with community, the way that I celebrate and laugh with friends.
You know, it's like I used to say, I become black when I leave my apartment when I lived in LA.
Mm,
That's when I become black. When I walk down the
mm-hmm,
street to, you know, go get whatever I need at Trader Joe's,
mm-hmm,
and I catch a look, you know, from a white woman, I'm like, all right, I'm Black.
Mm-hmm. We
Or
know
even
it.
here, or interviewing Stefano in Italy, and we had a moment where you got your list going, you emotionally prepared. Today's the day I'm going to do my grocery shopping, and then you go out, you're walking, and then you see that look, and it's like, not
Mm-hmm.
today.
Right. I was feeling myself. I'm looking good, walking, feeling like connected to the world. And there's that look. And then I know about you, then it follows up. Then it can be like, it can sometimes turn on myself like, why do you care? Why are you letting that person give them that power?
For me, it goes back, it's an act of violence.
Mm,
That's how I frame it now for myself, so that I
mm,
can work on healing myself. That is an act of violence. I'm not
mm.
going to sugarcoat it. I may not say it or shout it in the streets, but the way you look at me or the energy that you give me is not positive, so then it's negative.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. I like that reframing. It is an act of violence.
Yeah. So,
Ooh, I'm gonna be writing in my
to
journal about that later.
so just all, thank you for that with this poem. Well, when I'm not Black, because I just was like, oh yeah, yeah,
Aw, thanks, Eric.
yeah. Um, to kind of touch back a little bit, because you just mentioned it about Black Lives Matters and the marches and all that stuff, and it's great to get the allyship and all those things. But something that you wrote, or that was written about you in May 2022 article with the Berkshire Eagle, or
Mm-hmm.
Berkshire, or Berkshire.
Berkshire. Mm-hmm.
Berkshire, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Written by Heather Bello, you shared
Mm-hmm.
your insights on non-Blacks who marched in these movements. And you said, quote, "It would allow white people to congratulate themselves on their wokeness. The truth is that liberals can often be the worst offenders. You think voting for X and attending BLM protests grants you freedom from looking at your own biases. Believe me, you have them." And I like that you put that in print.
So much of what I'm doing is started from that letter to the editor, which is written. And then once again, that letter became kind of mini viral and was shared like a couple of thousand times to this like little local paper. And people started messaging like, oh my God, that's my story. And then from that, I got more. And then the poems came out and it really just solidified like, oh, right. You know, keep talking.
But I think it's based on your truth and on experiences, because when that whole thing exploded, because I was in Stockholm when that happened,
Mm-hmm.
and what shocked me was there were marches there, but it was beautiful in a way because it was a lot of the ethnic minorities in
Mm-hmm.
Sweden, and I have a friend there who's Black, and she shared like, yeah, this happens here too. So that was eye
Right.
opening for me, like truly eye opening. But on social media, all of a sudden, somebody who even at that time didn't have this platform, I didn't have this podcast. I
Mm-hmm.
was writing sporadically, but I wasn't really posting. All of a sudden, I was really popular. And first, my
Mm-hmm.
ego got like, oh, okay, this person. And I was like, well, no, wait a minute,
Right.
wait a minute, and to relate it to when you say like when something like a crime happens, and as a Black person, you go, oh shit, please don't let it be a Black person who did
Mm-hmm.
it. The reverse, or in the other camp, is a white person. When these people were, making their profiles Black and, oh, I support you, I love you. In my mind, I was like, how long is this going to last?
Right. And see, and for that, and to that point, Eric, I'm always fascinated in my mind at when is the moment you decide I can take the sign down? When is the moment?
Yeah.
When is the moment like you decide I change? I always want to know. They're just like, hey, you know what? Black lives, you know what? In the last 2 weeks, those black lives, they started mattering. I can take the sign out of the yard. Let me, you know what? I can change that. A black, Facebook, all black Facebook post. That's not, let me go back to the picture of me at the beach.
Right.
But seriously, what is that moment when you're just like, oh yeah, let me just switch it back? That result, that the structural and institutional, all that stuff that led into George Floyd, that's still there, just because we forgot about the video. And so, are y'all still like marching and talking about that? Because it's not as easy.
Yeah, that's something that people really can stand behind. But when you share a personal experience, the eyes glaze over. I'm saying his name because I don't want to take credit for it, but Gamal Tarawa, or G as he goes by
Mm-hmm.
here in the UK, he posed a really good thing that I think he uses in some of his work. Was like, we get a lot like, what is it like to be Black? But to
Mm-hmm.
say, what is it like to be white?
Yeah. I was in a conference yesterday. Undoing Racism for my work, and at the end of it, there are lots of white people. There's lots of black people, and we identified what culture we were. We talked about what do you like about your race, and it was interesting to hear. And there's no judgment, honestly, but it was interesting that most of the people, there were some people that were not black or white, but most of them were black or white. Black people talking about like things of like music and some really joyous, but white people were talking about like be able to go to the store and not be followed around. There's a culture. We all have cultures, but realizing how intrinsically that culture is tied into white supremacy and in relation to this hierarchical thing in which other people are on the bottom.
Or the power of language. My aunt, my mom's sister, is a retired librarian, and one of the
Mm-hmm.
things she used to say to me that I'm using more now in Europe, because we talk about ethnicity, at least in the States, and even here in some ways in relation to ethnic minorities. Like in the States, everybody is a ethnic group. There's Italians, there's Irish, and so she's always said, find a way to weave into the conversation. Oh, what's your ethnic background? Yeah.
Do you do
To
that?
I don't think about it, but I'm learning more too. I'm relating so much again to you really coming to terms with your gifts and your, needing to share your truths and how that's, helping you, of course, professionally, but how it's helping others. So now I'm a bit more conscious of that and saying, I need
Mm,
to do that more often. Yeah.
mm. What's the next step for you in doing that, do you think? Ooh, now I'm asking you the questions.
Like I'm aware that I'm sometimes editing myself, not so much in how I speak, but maybe what I want to say, but maybe pausing in those moments and saying, no, let this marinate for a second so then I can ask this question and not worry about the white fragility because I think I still worry about that.
And I know for me, it's just acknowledging maybe I always will, but maybe in that pause, I can say, like, all right, this time I'm going to push back. Sometimes I won't, but I'm doing the best I can. What's it like for you to be in Sweden when like these big, like, like the video that's out right now?
Thank you for that. Yeah, for the George Floyd, I haven't really watched it just for my own protection, my emotional well-being, because I saw the Philando Castile one, and that one wrecked me. Even thinking about it, just that because for me, what that demonstrates is those individual police officers not seeing that man and his wife or girlfriend and that poor little girl as human.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point of when we Black Lives Matter, and then how long can I do this before I put these placards back into the closet. That particular killing that was recorded, people should still be in up in arms about that today. It's important for some people, but for me, and I think we have 400 plus years of, transatlantic slave trade, colonialism. We have enough data. We already know that, people who are marginalized or who are invaded, these countries that are invaded, because we, again, with language, we don't use the language that colonialism was invasion. And really being educated and hearing these stories from people who came from these countries who know their histories in the way that Black Americans we don't, but hearing that they didn't experience necessarily slavery, but they experienced these European powers coming in and invading their lands.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I want to thank you so much and ask if you have any final thoughts or insights.
But I love that you have this podcast. This is amazing. And to hear those voices is so powerful for like, not from just me, but like those kids out there, being like, oh, but like the technology is crazy now. I mean, in the best possible way in terms of connecting us. Like I've never met you and I'm like, already, I've just told you all kinds of stuff going on and feel comfortable.
You didn't ask me, but I'm going to say, because you shared about, your educational background and that you didn't think you could be a writer, but that's what pulled me into you.
Mm.
So, I'll just say to you, you do have that gift. And, it definitely is impacting people, through some of the stories that you shared. So,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, thank you for being that example.
Thank you, Eric. So
Yeah, yeah,
much. This is, yeah, this is beautiful. I'm really
yeah.
happy you asked me.
I found you online, of course, but where else can we find you apart from Instagram?
Well, Instagram, I'm Theodore Huxtable. But also the project, if you want to read more about the art project and also about me, the greatbarringtonproject.com and the Blackyard Collective NYC.org. One more is I'm also, right now, I'm on a 3-person panel that's going to decide on the first statue in the ever of W.B. Du Bois. And if you want to read more about that project, it's called the W.B. Du Bois Sculpture Project. I think it's .org, but it could be .com. And I think, and on February 20th, I was picked. This is like crazy big news, which actually is the first time I'm really telling it because they haven't done the PR. I was selected to be the W.B. Du Bois, to give the 2023 W.B. Du Bois lecture at Simon's Rock Bard College. They picked someone they think is like a thinker. I was like, you're picking me? Like the past people have been like the head of the NAACP, Pulitzer Prize winners, Lonnie Guinier, the Supreme Court Justice nominee. And this year they picked someone who quit school in 11th grade. And they said, we selected you because somebody nominated me. And then when I met with them, they said, because your realness, your authenticity, how I connect is being myself. And so I'm scared as can be about this lecture. It's going to be like live streamed. I don't know the information, but yeah, that's huge for me. And I can't wait to tell more about me, the world, how I see the world,
Well, congratulations. And
Thank you, Eric.
I'll ask you about that too after we end the call. Or maybe, I'm guessing you're going to share that on social media because I'd like to see that too.
Yeah, I will. I should be sharing it soon. They're just working on the posters and such.